Hola, hola, hola.
Hola, em sentiu bé? Hola, hola, hola. Algun problema de micro? Estic sense micro? Perdó, no se sentirà el vídeo.
Yes.
Correcte. Hola, hola, ara sí, molt bé. Vale, doncs comencem. Bona tarda a tots i totes. Benvinguts al Canòdrom i benvinguts a la Biennal Ciutat i Ciència de Barcelona. És un plaer estar aquí presentant aquest programa. El meu nom és Carles Sora, em presento, soc director del Centre de la Imatge i la Tecnologia Multimèdia de la Universitat Politècnica de Catalunya i he tingut l'oportunitat de coordinar aquest subprograma de la Biennal dedicat a l'àmbit dels videojocs i la recerca acadèmica en videojocs. La voluntat d'aquest programa és la d'obrir aquest espai, aquest estudi acadèmic al voltant dels videojocs, perquè potser no és tan conegut com hauria de ser, però en tot cas estem davant d'un fenomen, el del consum, el del joc, el del gaudi dels videojocs, que és massiu. Sabeu que en alguns estrats de la societat estem parlant d'estadístiques de 60, 70, 80% de la població segons les edats que juguen a videojocs i que per tant, com qualsevol altre mitjà de comunicació, té un impacte molt rellevant en la societat, en les dinàmiques, en l'aprenentatge, en les relacions personals que tenim els uns amb els altres i des de la universitat, des de la recerca, això s'estudia. S'estudia des de diferents perspectives i el que hem intentat amb aquest petit programa que us presento, que us presentem, que comencem, vaja, és intentar cobrir tres línies de treball. Tenim dues taules. Aquesta tarda al Canòdrom tindrem dues taules de debat al voltant de la recerca, ara us presentaré la primera, després tindrem una segona aquí mateix i demà tindrem un taller al voltant de l'urbanisme, imaginari de futurs, apropiació de la ciutat i Minecraft, que sona bastant bé, no? Molt bé, doncs us passo a presentar-vos la taula d'avui. La taula es diu Serious Games, política i acció social. Les tres expertes convidades parlaran sobre el paper dels videojocs en la denúncia social, en el debat polític o en el foment de la participació ciutadana. Amb nosaltres tenim la Teresa de la Era, ella està connectada des d'Holanda, no sé si els companys podran posar les imatges de Zoom i veurem les convidades. Ella és doctora i investigadora en jocs digitals persuasius, és professora del Departament de Mitjans i Comunicació de la Universitat Erasmus Rotterdam i membre del grup d'investigació Gaming Matters. Susana Pollack, ella també estarà present connectada des dels Estats Units, és presidenta de la plataforma i festival Games for Change, ha posat en marxa dosenes de programes per impulsar el sector dels videojocs i els mitjans immersius als Estats Units i és responsable també de XR for Change, una comunitat que treballa en noves formes per millorar la vida utilitzant tecnologies immersives. I finalment, qui tenim aquí avui amb nosaltres, el moderador, és Luca Carrubba. Ell és doctor en Belles Arts, sociòleg de la comunicació i expert en videojocs. És codirector de Arts Games, una organització que investiga la intersecció entre art, ciència i tecnologia i política dels videojocs i actualment és comissari de l'exposició Homo Ludens, videojuegos para entender el presente, de la Fundació La Caixa. Sense més, us deixo amb el debat, espero que ho gaudiu i ens veiem. Adéu.
Bueno. Muchas gracias, Carlas. Es un honor estar aquí. Realmente se agradece mucho la presencialidad y se agradece mucho este panel que tengo el placer y el honor de compartir, realmente de dos investigadoras, dos personas inspiradoras. Así que muchas gracias a la organización y a Carlas para hacer esto posible. Creo que sin más me gustaría dar la palabra a Teresa de la Era para que nos introduzca un poco su línea de trabajo y nos cuente un poco lo que son sus objetivos y sus temas. Teresa?
Yes, okay, so as already, okay, so as it's a little bit difficult with the audio because I'm hearing the translation, so I'm not sure what I'm supposed to. Because if I click on off, then I cannot hear anything what you're saying. So I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. I'm not sure if someone can help me.
La cuestión es, quizá puedes empezar a contarnos un poco de tu trabajo apagando el micro y mientras tanto vemos con los técnicos si hay una forma de solucionar. ¿Qué te parece? Evidentemente este contexto híbrido nos trae siempre nuevas sorpresas, ¿no? Esta nueva realidad nos impone de trabajar desde un nuevo lugar. Las técnicas, las prácticas cambian mucho y bueno, tenemos que ir reaprendiendo un poco los formatos también de las presentaciones. Os doy la gracia para la paciencia. No sé si Teresa puedes avanzar o quizás damos la palabra a Susana y mientras tanto vemos si podemos solucionar tu problema. ¿Me escuchas? Hi, Susana. Can you hear me?
Hello, would you like to begin?
Yes, please. I think it's the way to go.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much for having me here at the bicentennial event. I wish I could be there in person with each of you, but let's say in 2 years I'll be back if I'm invited. Hope I will be. But I'm speaking to you from New York. Again, my name is Susanna Pollack, and I'm president of Games for Change. Games for Change is a not-for-profit that was founded in 2004, so almost 18 years ago, with a simple premise that games could have a power beyond entertainment. Our mission is to work with game developers, but also social innovators to help empower them to use this medium that has become ubiquitous across society, as well as immersive media, which is a new form of media, but we think has terrific potential, and how to use these as drivers of social change. Our community is a really unique one because it's not just the developers, it's also social activists, large NGOs and foundations, government agencies, scientists, academia, like Teresa, and others who are researching, exploring, practicing, or interested in learning how they can use this medium for social good. So we're not a studio, we're not making the content, but we see ourselves as building a community of practice over the past 2 decades. Our big event is the Games for Change Festival, which takes place in just a month and a half now, July 12th to 14th. And as we were forced to bring our event into a virtual space last year, we also saw how truly global the community is. And I raise that here because I think there could be people who are interested in learning more and diving deeper into this space where we act as a convener and bringing people all over the world together to talk specifically about games and immersive media. And so we run programs outside of that event, that annual event. We work with young people on how to inspire the next generation of game designers to think about games as impact levers. We like the idea of helping students, young people, go from being a consumer of this popular medium into being a creator of this of content and being in the driver's seat of how they can make meaningful and impactful contributions to society. We also had this initiative around XR for Change, where we are also working with creators and researchers about how this medium can expand. And so there's a number of ways we can that we go into how we look at different forms of impact that games or immersive media can have. It's not all, it's not one type of impact, and I think Teresa will be able to talk about this later from a research perspective. But from our perspective, from a social impact design perspective, it's something that we encourage all of our partners to think about different impact goals, whether it's having to do with raising awareness around a social issue or the transfer of knowledge, right? 2 very different types of impact, with different measurable models, right? Does someone know something after playing a game that they didn't know before? Let's think about how that's used in education, right? With math skills versus something broadly like having people think about climate change, through the playing of a game, right? That may have different assessment models and different distribution models. And that's very different from, let's say, civic engagement, where you want to bring communities together, or you want to crowdsource data, or something in the healthcare sector where you actually might want to help have a game help with behavior change or rehabilitation. So I'll leave it right there for the moment, but I think something I'd love to talk to more about is how impact goals can be aligned with different type of game mechanics, and how together games can hopefully achieve what the creator or the mission-oriented organization wants to achieve through the design of a game, distribution of a game.
Fantástico, fantástico. Muchas gracias, Susana. Me gustaría hablar con Teresa, no sé si ha solucionado el problema y nos puede introducir un poco su línea de trabajo. Tengo entendido que tenías un problema de retorno del sonido, de la traducción. ¿Me escuchas?
I can hear you now.
Perfecto, muchas gracias.
Okay.
Entonces, si te parece, ¿nos puedes introducir tu línea de trabajo?
Okay, so as you presented already, I work for the Department of Media and Communication for Erasmus University Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And basically my expertise is exploring how digital games are used as media for communication, so how we can use the game to convey a message to the player, but also as media for persuasion, how we can influence the attitude and the behavior of players. When I started exploring this phenomenon, I started from the field of advertising and how digital games could be used for conveying advertising messages. But when doing that, I was able to identify the multiple dimensions, persuasive dimensions that could be used in digital games for persuasion. Maybe you could think that persuasion within games is similar to persuasion in other audiovisual contents. Is not exactly the same. First, because digital games are interactive, and because are interactive, the player is going to take decisions, and these decisions are going to somehow impact the way we perceive or we receive the message. So in the moment that we are designing these games, we need to take into consideration what is going to happen with the message in the moment this interaction is going to happen. Apart from that, digital games are very complex as a medium. So there are multiple dimensions in there that we can use, from the rules of the game, the way we design a character, the narrative of the game, or if, for example, the control is going to vibrate in a specific moment and is going to tell us a message. So in 2014, I started a big research project in which we were trying to understand a little bit better how these persuasive dimensions could be used in digital games to foster positive societal change. So we analyzed hundreds of these games, and we were able to identify all these dimensions. And as Susanna was saying, we were also concluding that depending on which is the goal that you have, you should design games in different ways, right? It is completely different if what you want to do is, for example, reinforce a political idea that you already have, then what you want to do is to change that idea. It's not just because you are putting a message into a game that you are going to, by miracle, going to be able to change a political idea that someone has. But it is true that the complexity of digital games and the complexity of persuasion within digital games and the interactive dimension of digital games give us extra possibilities, extra tools for persuasion. After understanding this better, I also became really interested in understanding, well, now that I know how all these persuasive dimensions work, can I also use this knowledge to use, for example, games that have been already designed, more entertaining type of games in a specific context to foster positive societal change? So we conducted several projects. One of them was, for example, using collaborative digital games in Dutch schools and putting refugees, children who were refugees attending the schools, and Dutch children playing together. In the moment they started playing together, they had no relationship at all. They were not able to talk to each other, and we were able to demonstrate that by playing together collaborative games, the games were able to foster social interaction between them. Because when playing the games, they had other possibilities to communicate by nonverbal communication in the game, by using the characters in the game, what was going on in the game. And we were able to see also that the relationship that they established by playing the game was also a relationship that developed beyond the playing session. So a few weeks later, they were still friends, and they were communicating using some of the tools that they learned while playing games. So there are many other examples that we can maybe discuss during the session. So maybe I give again the floor to Luca,
Okay.
and we can continue talking.
Gracias, Teresa. Seguro habéis abierto varias ventanas que intentaremos como abrir un poco más y introducir. Para arrancar esta conversación me gustaría como presentar 5 ideas alrededor del videojuego. No son hipótesis, son realmente como más bien tweets. Un poco que me sirven a mí y que os presento para pensar el videojuego desde otro lado. La primera es que diseñar es siempre un acto político. El diseño como tal es una idea, es dar idea, dar forma al mundo. Cuando estamos diseñando, sea un objeto, sea un proceso, sea un espacio digital, estamos realmente metiendo dentro de este proceso las relaciones de fuerzas que atraviesan la sociedad y donde nosotras estamos intervenidas por esas fuerzas. Pensamos, por ejemplo, en los espacios digitales que utilizamos todos los días. Algo tan sencillo como el botón de like de un Facebook, un Twitter, son herramientas que de alguna forma están mostrando una idea de mundo. Hacer hincapié en lo bueno y no en lo malo, porque hay un like y no un unlike, ¿no? Son ideas de mundo. El diseño es un acto político. Segunda, jugar significa participar. Hay Huizinga, que es uno de los antropólogos que de forma más atenta ha estudiado las relaciones del juego con la sociedad y nos hace entender cómo a través del juego estamos construyendo mundo, ¿no? Cuando jugamos damos el nombre a las cosas, cuando somos pequeños socializamos roles de género, participamos de lleno en la sociedad. En ese sentido, por ejemplo, hay un teórico que se llama Marshall McLuhan que nos habla de cómo los juegos pueden ofrecer a cualquiera los medios inmediatos de participación en la vida plena de una sociedad, como no puede ser ofrecida por ningún trabajo o rol. Es decir, los juegos nos hacen partícipes de la sociedad. Pensamos, por ejemplo, de pequeño, cuando el juego de simulación, el juego de las muñecas, el juego de rol, ahí estamos socializando los roles de la sociedad, lo estamos negociando y a la vez estamos participando en ella. Tercero, el videojuego es tecnopolítica. Es decir, que al ser un dispositivo tecnológico, se configura y se ubica en un entramado de relaciones de poderes que atraviesan la tecnología. Por lo tanto, jugar a videojuego también puede ser un acto tecnopolítico. Nos estamos enfrentando y confrontando con este mundo. Estamos constantemente negociando quiénes somos y cómo queremos estar en ese espacio al jugar. No son objetos neutrales, son lugares donde generamos identidades, socializamos, construimos junto a los demás en una relación tecnológica y tecnopolítica que siempre es asimétrica, porque normalmente estamos consumiendo unos juegos y una tecnología que nosotras no diseñamos. Cuarto, el diseño de videojuegos puede ser entendida como una metodología de participación. A la hora de pensar un juego, de diseñarlo, estamos metiendo mucho de lo nuestro. Una cosa, tía, cuando empezamos a programar o a diseñar, a contemplar un juego, cada persona lo programará y lo diseñará de forma diferente. Raramente dos personas van a llegar al mismo resultado desde el mismo lugar. Cada una implementará una forma diferente de realizar este diseño. ¿Por qué? Tiene que ver con la historia propia personal, tiene que ver con el mundo cultural de referencia. Ahora bien, el diseño de juego puede ser una metodología compartida para pensar juntos retos sociales, intervenir la realidad, pensar un juego sobre cómo transformar esta plaza y darle un uso, la plaza del Canódromo, y darle un uso diferente a toda la comunidad, implica tener que debatir entre todos sobre qué quiere decir esta plaza para cada una de nosotras, cómo la podemos mejorar, qué valor tiene como bien común, cuáles son los deseos que yo como persona y nosotros como colectivo postulamos ahí. Y a partir de esta negociación que hacemos, eso es el diseño, pues lo trasladamos a unas mecánicas de juegos, a unos objetivos, a una forma de jugar, a un producto. Y finalmente, la quinta, que, bueno, propongo la idea que el videojuego está roto. En esta idea que el videojuego se expanda, en esta realidad donde los juegos serios ya atraviesan toda la sociedad y todos los haceres de la sociedad, desde la salud al trabajo, a la comida, pues ya no podemos entender el videojuego solo como un objeto comercial, como un objeto de consumo, como un lugar de puro entretenimiento. Tenemos la necesidad de imaginar el videojuego de una forma mucho más amplia, dejar de lado ciertos estereotipos y ciertas formas que en la historia hemos asociado al videojuego por diferentes razones y empezar a imaginar el videojuego como algo diferente. Hoy en día se está generando una multitud de propuestas de diseño que rompen con los paradigmas normativos de lo que es el videojuego y que se empiezan a utilizar cada vez más, tanto en la sociedad como en las instituciones científicas, para hacer investigación, para generar participación política, para transformar el mundo. Yo creo que bueno, hoy tenemos la posibilidad de debatir algunos de estos puntos con dos personas que llevan años trabajando estas cuestiones, de pensar y imaginar el videojuego como realmente una herramienta de transformación. En el caso, por ejemplo, de Teresa, tú apuntabas, ¿no?, al tema de la persuasión, de cómo los videojuegos pueden ser entendidos como un medio de persuasión. Bien, en ese sentido, me gustaría preguntarte cuáles son las características diferenciales a la hora de pensar el videojuego como un medio de persuasión. ¿Cuáles son las diferencias con otros medios y por qué es interesante estudiarlos, utilizarlos, investigarlos?
Yeah, I was telling a little bit about this in the introduction already. So the first thing that is, I think, really important to highlight is the aspect of the interactivity of the game. The fact that we cannot completely control what the player is going to do with the game. And this was also an argument that has been used as a criticism by some researchers, saying, well, if there is always going to be this element of interaction, we cannot fully control what the player is going to do with our game. We need to take into consideration that the player is sometimes going to cheat, is going to create some extra rules for the game. The player always wants to have a feeling of agency, the feeling that he has the power to transform what is happening with the game. It's actually possible to control the persuasive message that we are trying to convey. Is it possible to actually design a game to convey a message in a way that in the way that we want to? And there was a lot of debate about this. And this is a little bit connected to the multiple dimensions, persuasive dimensions that we could use in the game. At the beginning, some researchers were saying that the persuasion in the game would go only on the rules of the game and how these rules would ask you to follow specific steps in the game in order to understand the message by filling the gaps. But after conducting more research, other researchers contributed to that, saying it's not only about the rules of the game. There are many other things, other dimensions in the game that are contributing to this. As I said before, we need to take into consideration the narratives, or the way we design the visuals, or the sound in the game, or the vibrations of the control that we are using. If we think carefully about all of these dimensions, then we can actually design a game that still gives freedom to the player, it still gives the player the possibility of feeling this agency while playing the game, but still conveying a persuasive message. But what we cannot forget is that we always have to have this persuasive or serious goal in mind when designing all the elements in the game, because sometimes a common mistake is mixing and designing some elements for persuasion and other elements in the game just for the game to be fun. And in that sense, there could be contradictions within these elements and then conveying a message that is not the right message. So I think these are at least some of the key points that we could take or should take into consideration when designing these persuasive games.
Clarísimo. Muchas gracias, Teresa. Hablando justamente, Susana, hablabas antes de la relación entre mecánicas y objetivos y cómo en una relación sana entre eso se puede impactar y se puede transformar la realidad. Así que me gustaría que hicieras un poco hincapié en esta posibilidad transformativa, cómo realmente el videojuego en tu experiencia impacta la sociedad a nivel psicológico, algún ejemplo, algún caso a partir de tu experiencia, o cómo esta relación entre mecánica y objetivos se tiene que establecer para que realmente tenga un impacto el videojuego.
Yes, I'd be happy to. So when game designers set forth to create a game for impact, at the very beginning, we encouraged that the game designers need to have some subject matter expert on part of their team, right? That leads to, I think, a healthy collaboration that allows the experts to do what they do best, right? You're not necessarily going to have a game designer who understands deeply about, political issues or health issues, and at the same time, a researcher, a PhD in that field, are not going to understand game mechanics. So that collaboration is critical at the beginning, and it is with a talented game designer, you'll be able to create an experience that is entertaining and engaging, and provokes the player to want to continue while learning or experiencing something that has value. Not all serious games need to be serious. Serious games can be fun. In fact, that's the reason why Games for Change is not serious game for change, right? Like, we want to support the idea that you can have a purely entertaining game and that has value and can be transformational, right? Another word that's used in the space a lot, particularly at Carnegie Mellon's entertainment ETC technology program, is the idea of that games are transformative. They can take you from a particular understanding and transform your understanding into another place. And I think that's a very powerful way to look at it. And I think a lot of it is the work that Teresa talked about, persuasive, right? So how can you change somebody's mindset on something or change their attitude? But it also could be broader than that. It also could be literally how do you pass knowledge over from one to another, right? Where a game is going to provide opportunities for someone to either absorb information in an engaging way, through role-playing, through puzzle-based games. There are so many different types of game mechanics that lead to an outcome, and some are more powerful than others in different circumstances. But the underlying skills that are being used by a player in a game in many ways are universal. Players are encouraged or need to problem solve while they're making a game. They have to use critical thinking skills. If they're playing a multiplayer game, they are having to exercise communication skills and collaboration skills. I mean, all of those skills are true in the most entertainment first game. But if you think about those skills being used to help problem solve and to deeply understand an issue in order to make your way through a game or go up to another level, you are being motivated by that game, right, in order to achieve being able to progress through that game. And being done so with a very subtle understanding and sophisticated understanding, but how to challenge someone just enough that they find the game interesting and not too easy, but not too hard that they can't solve it, right? And that's a very the technical term is flow, right? So you can get the player in a state of flow where they're fine failing and having to respawn or trying again and again, because it just at that frustration level where they don't know if they can make it, they are able to solve something and move on to the next level, the next challenge. And that dynamic, as I said, is true in entertainment games, but you adapt, you add that to a social impact game, and that's magic, right? And it doesn't feel like, there's an expression in the United States that we use about chocolate covered broccoli, right? Where you have the vegetable that nobody wants to eat, you put some chocolate around it, you make a game around it, and all of a sudden it's supposed to be fun and engaging, and it doesn't necessarily work that way.
I see. Thank you. Me parece interesante esta capacidad transformativa dentro de una relación muy concreta entre mecánicas y objetivos que apuntaba Susana. Es algo que la academia desde hace ya 20 años aproximadamente está estudiando. Los videojuegos han entrado en la academia y en el discurso científico tanto como un objeto de investigación, pero a la vez también como una herramienta de investigación. Tú, Teresa, en este momento eres una académica de cierto nivel y una referencia mundial en el estudio de los juegos digitales. ¿Nos podrías comentar y hablar un poco de esta relación que tiene la academia con los juegos, cómo se está transformando y por qué entran de lleno en el discurso científico, en la producción científica?
Well, I think that what is going on in relation to game research is that obviously the game industry is growing a lot. There are being a lot of changes. So there is a lot of interest in trying to understand which are the effects of these games, if these games actually work. And we always get like big companies coming to us and asking us to provide all the insights about the effects of these games, why they work or why they do not work. But it's really important to understand that, as Susanna was saying, it's not just because a topic that is a serious topic is transformed into a game that this game is immediately going to work. We really need to understand how this works, and we need to understand that there are many multiple goals that we try to achieve using games, many different ways in which we can design a game to achieve that goal, and depending on that, we are going to get the result that we are looking for, or we are not going to get the result that we are looking for. I think that's something that we need to take into consideration and always think about when we are conducting research about it. And none of the results of research can guarantee that exactly the same effect or the same result is going to translate into a different type of game. I think that's something important that we need to understand too. But you were asking why research is important and why is happening with research in relation to games. And for example, when we were exploring the dimensions of persuasion within games, And we were talking about, well, these are the different ways in which you can persuade people. Then we usually got the question, is this actually ethical, what you are doing? Because you are uncovering the different persuasive strategies that could be used, and then people could use these strategies for purposes that are not that positive, right? And my answer is always, well, the strategies are already being used. We are not inventing anything. The strategies are there. And what we are doing is to uncover the strategies so we can regulate the strategies, because it's necessary to know what is being used to be able to regulate what is being used. And also we can create awareness about this, and then also educate people on this. And for some companies also give the tools to, well, if you want to do this and you want to have a positive impact, do it this way or the other way. So I think this is the way that research is contributing to what is going on with this phenomenon.
Muchas gracias por traer en la mesa la cuestión ética, que evidentemente es una cuestión súper importante a la hora de pensar los videojuegos como metodología transformativa o como medio de persuasión. Susana, ¿tú crees que en ese momento, en esta expansión que estamos asistiendo de los serious games, donde hay como un cruce intersectorial muy importante de actores diversos que participan a la vez en la construcción de este objeto, pienso empresas, instituciones públicas, entidades de la educación, mundo privado, hay un interés a pensar los juegos serios como dispositivo para fomentar la participación ciudadana? Y si sí, ¿a partir de qué ética, dentro de qué marco creativo se está pensando y se está adoptando, digamos, los juegos serios como una posibilidad?
So we're seeing a lot of exciting programs coming out of partnerships, cross-sector partnerships that that both include large-scale, otherwise known as AAA video games, and the not-for-profit sector or a city sector. And then we also are seeing other types of partnerships. I'll start with that because I think it is really exciting. So the commercial game that many people probably are familiar with, called Pokemon Go, was produced by Niantic, released about 5 years ago, and was a phenomenon, right? It was an augmented reality game that allowed people to play a video game using their phone in the real world and collecting different Pokemon and hatching eggs. And it was, on one level, a game that brought young people and just people out of their homes to play a game, right? Where people were physically exercising as they were exploring their communities and trying to hatch an egg that would, earn points and allow them to continue on. On another level, it also brought communities together, where people would come onto the streets and go to a park where they were told there's, gosh, I don't remember what the word is, but where the Pokemons were congregating, a Pokestop or something.
Pokestop.
And they would convene and form relationships. And then I started seeing in the United States, cities and not-for-profits or foundations looking how they could use this popular game as a way to bring communities together and perhaps even revitalize urban areas. And a American foundation called the Nye Foundation started working with Niantic to develop experiences tied to public events in cities to bring people out into the street to help with economic development and foster community. And I love that because that in some ways was in the DNA of the original game as developed, but it wasn't explicit. It wasn't that Pokemon Go was created to be a social impact game or a serious game, but the values and the game mechanics were implicit in their intentional game design. And that is something that I think Niantic continues to do and is a great model. Another example, I will say, of civic engagement and governments is some activity that's happening in the US with our Department of State, which has recognized video games as and gamer communities as communities that and as a form of media that's worth paying attention to because of how large scale and widely played games are around the world. And it's been exciting to see the U.S. government turning to video games to distribute information to global audiences. So in the case of the State Department, their interest is about outside the United States. And they have a big focus on disinformation, right? How to educate people around the world about how to identify disinformation and give people critical skills, media literacy skills in some context, so they can navigate bad actors. And they invested in a game, I think that was produced by someone in Scandinavia, around this issue called Harmony Square. It actually was very simple design. It was based on innocuous theory. But it was so simply and specifically designed that it was acknowledged by our peers at Games for Change and not at our annual festival. But the original funder and the interest, right, was government agency, and I think that's really exciting to see.
Definitivamente es súper interesante ver cómo
I could go on with more examples, but
as you wish.
I'll pause
I
there.
mean, we have time. If you wish, si quieres seguir, puedes seguir. Si no, puedo hacer una pregunta a Teresa para articular una conversación. ¿Sí? No, creo que. Please.
Am I continuing?
Yeah.
Okay. So another terrific example that I've been seeing involves the United Nations. So different bodies within the United Nations have started to look at games as well. One of them actually has been a long-standing partnership with Minecraft. So Minecraft is, again, the audience is probably familiar with, a very popular game, not played just by kids, but by people around the world. And it's a world-building game, right? You're building blocks, you're creating communities, and depending on how you play, you might be shooting zombies, right? And trying to be the last survivor. But there are a lot of other tools for that Minecraft has lent itself useful for. One is in education. And with the acquisition that Microsoft did of Minecraft EDU, Minecraft as an education platform is being used in countries around the world as a place to house curriculum and have young people in some way, like at a tactile way, so it's digital tactile, be part of the learning process. Another really interesting partnership, though, is with the UN Habitat, I think is the division, with Minecraft, has a partnership called Block by Block. And it's a partnership where Minecraft developers are building, or at the UN agency, are building refugee camps in Minecraft and other public spaces in Minecraft prior to, digging the shovel, right, and starting the investment of the physical space itself. And it's remarkable to see that you can have such participation from non-experts in, urban planning and in social, design about large scales of people living within a footprint and how you're going to build structures and a community with that. All of that's happening within Minecraft. And I think that's an amazing use of a game. Again, not the original purpose of that game, but it was built in such a way that it lends itself really, really well to kind of creative solution design. And the last thing I will say also with, it's also on the diplomacy side. So we're involved in a project with video games as diplomacy platform. And it's not about a specific game that can be used like Minecraft or even Harmony Square, the other game that they invested in, but the process of making games. the communities of people who love games and bringing them together and discussing important issues, fostering skills within a shared passion for video games. And in the program that I'm describing right now is called Game Exchange, and we are running, we will be launching a virtual exchange program, literally for students in different Middle East and North African countries, where they'll learn how to make games, but have a collaborative experience with American kids where they together will be able to collaborate on making games and have that shared experience as a platform for shared dialogue and cross-cultural dialogue. The games that they'll be making will happen to be about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but they'll be able to use those topics as well as the game design process as a way to have conversations and understand differences and similarities within their different life experiences. And that's another way the games are able to bring people together. And there are going to be from Israel, both Arab, Palestinian, and Israeli kids will be participating, students from Bahrain and students from Abu Dhabi, as well as youth from Detroit, from Atlanta, and New York City, all from various different backgrounds and life experiences. I'm excited about that program.
Sounds cool. Sí. Indeed. Sí, como que Susana nos presenta un conjunto de proyectos que realmente como hacen pensar o visualizan de una forma muy clara esta capacidad que tiene en potencia el videojuego como de transformar, ¿no? También hay que reconocer que detrás o alrededor del videojuego en estos años se está generando un cierto tipo de hype, un cierto tipo de atención, donde es muy fácil también a la vez como vender proyectos alrededor del videojuego, porque el videojuego ya vende de por sí, ¿no? En cambio, veniendo de la academia y estando dentro de una Bienal de la Ciencia que trata de abordar el videojuego como una producción científica, creo que es muy necesario pensar cómo realmente podemos medir, calcular estos impactos que puede tener el videojuego en esos procesos transformativos. Teresa, en ese sentido te pido ayuda para que nos facilites tu visión en cómo el videojuego realmente, o sea, cómo podemos medir esa transformación y cómo podemos pensar, cómo podemos diseñar un videojuego que pretende aportar un proceso de transformación o de participación ciudadana respecto a un tema específico. ¿Cuáles son, digamos, las formas mejores, las estrategias en tu experiencia, en tu visión?
Yeah, maybe I can start talking about the common mistakes. What I have seen a lot is, for example, a game being designed for a specific purpose and the effect of the game just being measured by how many people play the game, for example. And it does not mean that many people are like going to the website and playing a specific game, that the game is achieving the specific goals that you want to achieve. Another common mistake, for example, is, checking what the player is doing in the game, and for example, if the result of the game by the end of the game is the expected one. For example, if a political issue or an environmental issue is being treated in the game and the player is winning the game, and you assume, well, the player has understood the message because he or she was able to achieve the final goal. But at some point, the player could be pretending to, agree with a specific message in order to win the game while still disagreeing with the topic. So it really depends on how the game has been designed. I can also give you an example. We studied in detail a game that is called Against All Odds. This game was designed in order to raise awareness about the journey of a refugee from their original country until their final destination. And an initial study that was conducted, this was a quantitative study. They were trying to compare the differences between using this game in order to raise awareness towards refugees and using, I think it was a YouTube video. and they were not able to find substantial differences between the two. And basically the conclusion in the study was, well, a game is not more effective than a YouTube video in order to raise awareness about the topic. First of all, that was a generalization. So you cannot generalize what happens with one single game to what would happen with any other game. Second, they did not pay attention to what was happening with the game and in which ways the game was being interpreted in order to compare it to the YouTube video. So we continued with a qualitative study by organizing playing sessions with people and then asking them to play the game and then having interviews with them in order to understand a little bit how they were interpreting the game, what was going on. And basically what they said was that they were able to understand the message. They were able to also recognize some elements in the game which would lead to creating some empathy towards refugees, but in the way the game was designed, it was too simplistic. They thought it was a too simplistic interpretation of this journey, and also visually, they thought it was too childish, at least some of the participants, and that was somehow impacting the experience they were having while playing the game. So although they understood the message, they did not feel that this impacted that much their empathy towards this. And then they thought that the video was more realistic in that sense. So when we are trying, a little bit the conclusion of this is when we are trying to assess the effectiveness of these games, first, try to understand that the results of any study only apply to that specific game. And second, it is always important to check what exactly in the game we want to know more about. It's like, I want to know more about the story, I want to know more about the rules, and then make sure you include that in the studies that you conduct. Because if you just conduct a study in which you try to generalize a little bit and you don't understand how the message was built within the game, it is difficult then to know how the results of the study are connected to the way the game it is designed.
Genial, muchas gracias, Teresa. La verdad que es emocionante poder contar con un nivel de experiencia como el tuyo, como el vuestro, el tuyo de Susana. Me gustaría ahora abrir un poco la ronda al público a preguntas y cuestiones que puedan haber surgido, pensando también que estamos reunidas en un lugar, el Canódromo, el Ateneo de Innovación Ciudadana, que por primera vez es el primer equipamiento municipal que se abre a la idea del videojuego como herramienta de transformación social, que contempla el videojuego como una pata troncal de un proyecto de participación ciudadana y que hospeda asociaciones, entidades y grupos que hacen del videojuego su práctica de trabajo cotidiano. Entonces, sin más, dejo la palabra al público y espero que podamos aprovechar estos 10 minutos que quedan para realmente aprovechar de las invitadas que tenemos aquí.
Perdona. Sí, hay una pregunta que me estaba surgiendo casi desde el inicio y que realmente yo misma me cuestiono. La voy a tratar de hacer rápida. ¿Hay alguna diferencia entre un videojuego que se utiliza para tratar de concienciar sobre un problema que un videojuego que se utiliza para tratar de vendernos un producto? Es decir, ¿en realidad estamos concienciando o hay una suerte de manipulación ahí para que lleguemos a una idea? Y si la diferencia solo es el hecho del propósito, o si también tiene que haber diferencias en el proceso de diseño del mismo, o en las formas en las que se produce, o en las formas en las que se va a tratar de lograr ese cambio en la mente de la persona para que adquiera un producto o para que adquiera una nueva conciencia sobre una realidad.
Muy interesante la pregunta, muchas gracias. No sé si Teresa o Susana quiere empezar a contestar.
I can go first, maybe.
Gracias.
I understand your question, and that connects a little bit to the ethics parts that we were discussing a few questions ago. First you need to understand which are all the possibilities, and you can also regulate. Somehow in your question, I understand that you feel that commercial games or non-serious games or entertaining games, they have some sort of manipulative intention. Well, I do not agree that needs to be that way. So as Susanna was saying, I think that there are many negative discourses attached to even commercial games that do not correspond to reality. So there are many benefits of playing commercial games related to developing specific skills. And there is nothing negative about playing games in comparison to consuming audiovisual content or even reading books, even if everything is done in the right way. So that could be first for me. And second, of course, it really always depends on how you use these strategies and which is the purpose of designing of a specific game and what exactly you are trying to achieve with the game. But I think my main message could be and this is why I think the session on highlighting the value of research and academic knowledge in relation to this is really important. If we are aware of everything that could be used, if we are aware of the strategies that are being used, it is easier to regulate them, but also use them responsibly, because you are not designing by instinct. You are designing, taking decisions that are made on purpose. I'm not sure if you understand. Maybe Susanna can contribute to what I'm saying, but I think it's understanding how this is done is really important to take control.
Susana, ¿te gustaría añadir algo?
Yes. Well, I think with everything Teresa said, and with emphasizing that one, commercial games, even the most, I'll say the violent ones, can have a benefit to the player, right? Because of the way it needs to be thinking about how to navigate through experience, you are being designed to go through choices about how to problem solve and mastering skills and developing resilience. I mean, the list goes on about what the actions you embody, right, to take in order to succeed in the game. But there is a question. I mean, if video games can be made for good, can they also be made for bad, right? And I think the answer is yes, they could be, right? I think the issue comes up and addressed as Teresa did with ethics, right? The responsibility of guiding someone through an experience narrative that is open-minded and respects the player, as opposed to leading them through something that can be disingenuous or with disinformation. But games, like other forms of media, it's up to the creator of what they want to do with it. That's nothing unusual to a game. I mean, you could make a film and have it be propaganda, or you could write a blog and just have it be untrue, right, and distribute it. So that part is not unique to games. In many ways, it's technology, and technology can be used for good. Technology could be used for bad. We just, as a society, and one that, as an organization, we're focused on the positive uses that games can have, as opposed to the watch guards who are looking at the unsafe ways game and technology is being used, right? There are other people out there doing that. So I think I answered your question. I think that's as far as I think I can take it.
Yo creo que sí. Yo la verdad, me gustaría añadir algo. Creo que, sin lugar a duda, los juegos se pueden reapropiar, juegos comerciales, violentos, se pueden utilizar en otros contextos y todo depende mucho de la persona que luego los diseña y que los usa. Pero sí, como, si entiendo bien la pregunta que se hacía, volvemos un poco a la cuestión ética que salió tanto en la conversación con Teresa como con Susana, ¿no? Como que hay una dimensión ética del diseño de videojuegos que reluce cuando estamos pensando en los videojuegos como medio persuasivo o medio de transformación política. Es decir, yo empecé mi intervención diciendo que el diseño es político. Cuando estamos utilizando y aprovechando determinada técnica de diseño oscuro, dark patterns, por ejemplo, cajabotines y otras técnicas de diseño para la retención de los usuarios, evidentemente este puede generar un conflicto en términos éticos con un principio, con un objetivo del proyecto que debería verse reflejado también en la forma en que se diseña el proyecto. Es decir, que sí yo opino que hay determinadas formas de diseñar que son más éticas que otras y entonces a la hora de pensar un videojuego en términos políticos o en términos de transformación social, este mundo, esta dimensión ética que se traslada en una práctica de diseño sí tiene que estar dentro de las formas en que pensamos los videojuegos. No sé si hay más preguntas en la sala, ahí hay una.
Bueno, primero, gracias por esta conversación. Y tengo una pregunta de aficionada total, no teniendo ni idea del tema en verdad. Pero a ver si si Teresa o Susana ha hecho alguna vez alguna investigación sobre el proceso inverso. Yo estoy entendiendo que hay una discusión y una investigación sobre el diseño del videojuego, el sentido y la ética, pero me gustaría saber si lo han mirado desde el lugar del usuario. Las experiencias en donde la comunidad se apropia de algún icono o de alguna idea presente un mensaje en un videojuego convencional y lo utiliza de un modo político. Estoy preguntando esto porque lo he visto ocurrir, pero no sé si hay investigación sobre ello más allá de la cultura visual. Es más evidente cuando se trata del cine, al menos yo lo he visto con V de Vendetta y la cantidad de gente en la calle con la máscara. Pero también lo he visto con otros iconos de videojuego que se convierten en un icono de algún principio o de algún valor o de alguna ética, pero que son apropiados por la comunidad, no desde el lado del diseño, sino desde el que utiliza el videojuego. ¿Habrá alguna investigación o lo han hecho ustedes?
Teresa, si quieres.
I did not do it myself personally, but I know that there are indeed studies about it. I cannot give you that many details about the results, but well, there is a phenomenon that is called modding, which is actually appropriating the game, transforming the game for specific purposes, and there are many examples of this. We were talking about also like negative type of uses of games. So there is this game, a commercial game that is really well known, GTA, Grand Theft Auto. This game has been appropriated, for example, by ISIS in order to recruit soldiers. So yeah, and I know that there are studies about this. I cannot give you much details about the results. But of course, there is a lot of interest about how users are appropriating games, using games to transform the message the game is conveying, and then how this is being shared. Again, I think it's really important to understand that this happens and to explore how this happens in order to create awareness. In relation to the previous question, I think that there are when we have this type of questions in mind and when we have this type of fears, is because we don't know much about it. This is why we are scared about the possible impacts. We need to be aware that all of this happens with, as you said, with films or with literature or with YouTube videos, right? But we are more familiar with them. Is that we feel more in control. With games, maybe it's not that many people that know how this works. So when you talk about this, it's immediately like, well, but this is really scary. This is really dangerous. It's not scary. It's not dangerous if we have knowledge and understanding. This is why it's really important when we educate new generations that this is something that is part of their education because it's part of their lives. So we cannot simply ignore that they are interacting with this type of content every day.
Sin lugar a dudas, siempre todos los nuevos medios en la historia de los medios han prendido fuego, han prendido los miedos de la sociedad. Es algo muy recurrente y ahora yo creo que ya llevamos unos cuantos años tratando de entender qué es este nuevo medio que llamamos videojuegos y ya podemos entrar en una edad madura donde realmente liberarnos del miedo. Encuentros como estos son necesarios justamente porque nos pueden traer una voz científica, una voz experta que nos ayude a ubicar. Susana, qué bueno verte otra vez. Te había perdido. No sé si quieres añadir algo, contestar a la pregunta que hicieron antes o sumarte.
I apologize for that connection, and so I did not hear the question, but I'm happy to say it again.
Ok, estaban preguntando desde el público si hay estudios o conocimiento concreto sobre los procesos de apropiación que se está haciendo de los videojuegos por parte de la gente en términos políticos, en términos de acción política y transformativa. Si tú en tu experiencia has visto alguna forma de apropiación que se está volviendo masiva, por ejemplo. Que la conexión no es buena, así que no te sientas forzada.
Is it still bad?
No, now it's better. I can hear you
Okay.
good.
All right, I apologize. I'm glad it happened, not at the beginning. So there are some independent, hold on. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, there are some independent games that have been created that had large scale success, that have some transformational experience in the political sector that I can bring your attention to and might be interesting to go find them. One is called a game called Papers, Please. And Papers, Please was made by a small studio in Poland, I think.
Yes.
Yes, I'm right. Teresa's nodding. And it is a game about border control, about a still very topical issue, and told in a way that doesn't put anyone politically on the hook, right? It takes place in a fictitious country with fictitious situations, but all relatable as an individual. And rather, you basically are taking the role of a border patrol agent, having to make choices about who you let into your country, your fictitious country. And so there are real examples that might come across. But what I find so interesting about the game is that
Susana,
it humanizes this issue.
Siento
It's
interrumpirte,
not
tienes
about economic,
un minuto.
risk. It's not about crime control, completely, or solely humanitarian issues. It's also a human being that stands at the border who has to make these decisions. And there are other factors at play about him or them and their lives, and quotas that are set by their employers, about bonuses and financial concerns. And it really
Susana,
humanizes the experience.
can you hear me?
I find that very powerful. And that is a game that has had tremendous success, made by a few people in a very small context. Another similar game that has had
Susana, can
big
you hear me?
reach over the last 2 years, but certainly before that, is a game called Plague Inc. And this is a game that has to do, not necessarily about political, but it is a social global issue. It has to do with a pandemic. But the game was made 5 or 6, 7 years ago, and in a very playful kind of inverted game approach. So how if you were a virus, how would you spread around the world, right? And it's rooted in scientific fact. So you're playing a game, you know, where instead of stopping a pandemic, you are trying to cause one. And in order to succeed, you have to understand about the scientific facts about biology. So now that we see in a pandemic and post-pandemic world, you know, there are some things that you really can learn about that game, and it is positioned as a social impact game, even though originally was not designed to be as such. But that too has had tremendous success, and I think there's a board game that you can do. There's continuing games in that model. But that game has also had a tremendous success, and they're not the big blockbuster titles, but made by a independent developer community.
Very clear. Gracias, muchas gracias. Ya el tiempo se nos va encima y tenemos que ir cerrando. Yo os doy las gracias sinceramente. Para mí ha sido una forma también de aprender, de conocer mejor vuestros trabajos, y creo que ha sido muy importante como poderlo presentar aquí en Barcelona en una platea pública y abrir el discurso científico, sacarlo de la academia, sacarlo de los festivales y llevarlo un poco a las plazas, que también es la idea de esta Bienal. Quiero volver a agradecer a Carla Sora y la organización y recordar que si estáis interesados y interesadas en esos temas, aquí en Barcelona, este lugar, ese espacio es la casa de proyectos de videojuego para la transformación social. Es donde pensamos, imaginamos los videojuegos desde este lugar. Es un lugar abierto, es un lugar público, es una casa común. Así que estáis todas y todos invitados a venir y participar. Muchas gracias. Gracias, Susana. Gracias, Teresa. Nos vemos pronto.
Thank you.
Thank you.